On the morning of March 12, 1928, the keeper of the St. Francis Dam found water coming out of the canyon wall, and the water was brown. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this story. A concrete dam leaking clear water is normal. Every one of them seeps. Brown water is different. Brown water means the leak is carrying the ground away with it. It means the thing the dam is standing on is going somewhere. 13 hours later, the dam was gone, and so was most of a valley. But the reason it failed was not the crack, and it was not the leak, and it was not really the dam at all. It was the hillside it was built against, which had already collapsed once on its own thousands of years before anyone poured concrete on it. Nobody knew. Nobody had looked. Los Angeles in the 1920s had a water problem it had created for itself. The city had just finished an aqueduct more than 200 miles long, dragging water across a desert and 2 mountain ranges. It worked, but the water arrived continuously, and the city did not drink it continuously. And the valley the water came from had started fighting back. Farmers there had already dynamited sections of the aqueduct. So Los Angeles needed storage near the city. A year of water held somewhere nobody could reach it. The man who chose the site was William Mulholland, self-taught, no engineering degree, and by then the most trusted infrastructure figure in California, because he had been right before, repeatedly, when other people said it could not be done. He picked San Francisco Canyon, about 40 miles north of the city. On the surface, it was an obvious choice. Narrow, steep-walled, deep enough to hold 12 billion gallons, and already city-owned because the aqueduct ran through it. What made it obvious on the surface is exactly what made it lethal underneath. That narrow canyon exists because it follows a geological boundary, and a boundary between 2 rock formations is, by definition, a line of weakness. Here is what the St. Francis Dam was standing on. The eastern side, the right abutment, was a reddish sedimentary conglomerate. Sandstone and gravel, cemented together, threaded through with gypsum. Gypsum dissolves in water, not slowly in geological time, measurably. Put a sample of that conglomerate in a glass of water, and you can watch it soften and come apart. Investigators did exactly that after the failure, and the demonstration is still the clearest single image of the problem. The western side, the left abutment, was something else entirely. Polona schist, a layered, foliated metamorphic rock, split into sheets and lubricated along those sheets with talc and serpentine. Talc is the softest mineral on the hardness scale. It is what talcum powder is. Serpentine is slick. Together, in layers tilted downhill, they make a surface that rock slides along. So, on one side, a foundation that dissolves. On the other, a foundation that slides. And the dam was wedged into the seam between them. No independent geologist was retained to study the site. No subsurface investigation was performed. No test borings into the abutments. Mulholland walked the canyon briefly with a geology professor along at one point and made the call. And while it was being built, the design changed. Twice the height was raised by 10 feet to store more water, reaching about 205 feet. The base was not widened to match, which means the pressure the foundation had to resist went up, and the footprint spreading that pressure did not. The reservoir began filling in 1926, and it filled slowly, about 2 years to reach the top. 2 years is a long time for water to work on rock. On the east, water moving through the conglomerate did what water does to gypsum. It took it into solution and carried it out. Slowly, continuously. Every day, a little less cement holding the gravel together. On the west, the water did something less visible and more dangerous. It saturated the schist. And when you saturate a layered rock with talc between the layers, you raise the water pressure inside those layers and you reduce the friction holding them in place. And this is the part of the story that I find genuinely hard to look away from, because it means the ending was written long before the beginning. That western hillside was not solid rock that the water was going to break. It was an ancient landslide, a mass of rock that had already detached and slid down that slope during the Pleistocene, and then sat there, re-cemented and looking like bedrock for thousands of years. The reservoir did not have to break the hillside. It only had to unstick it. Meanwhile, the dam was talking. Cracks appeared, normal in curing concrete, and they were grouted. Leaks appeared, normal in a concrete dam, and there were drains built to collect them. Every individual observation was defensible. That is what makes this pattern invisible from inside it. On March 7, 1928, the reservoir reached the spillway for the first time. Full. Maximum pressure on both abutments for the first time in the structure's life. 5 days later, the leak turned brown. Mulholland drove up with his deputy, Harvey Van Norman, and arrived about 10:30. They traced the leak upstream toward where the water was actually leaving the rock, and at the point of origin, the water was clear. Their conclusion: the mud was being picked up further down the slope from a construction road cut into the hillside. Loose fill, not foundation. The dam was seeping, not dissolving. That is not a stupid conclusion. Follow it. Muddy water is dangerous because it means foundation material is being carried away. If the water is clear where it leaves the rock, the foundation is not being carried away. The logic is correct. The premise is what failed. Because the dangerous process on the western abutment was not erosion. It was not carrying material out at all, so it could not have made the water dirty. It was saturation, water getting into the schist, raising pressure between the layers, and quietly canceling the friction that was holding an old landslide in place. A failure mode that moves nothing produces no sediment. It is invisible to the exact test they ran. They spent about 2 hours on site. The dam was declared safe. At 3 minutes to midnight, the power went out in the canyon. It did not crack and weep. It came apart. The western abutment moved, the old landslide reactivating, taking the section of dam anchored into it with it. On the east, the conglomerate, softened by 2 years of dissolution, gave way under the same instant of load transfer. 12 billion gallons entered San Francisco Canyon essentially at once. The keeper's cottage was directly below. He and his family were the first the water reached. His body was never recovered. A 1.5 miles downstream stood Powerhouse Number 2, with a workers' camp beside it. Families, in cottages, asleep. Of 67 people there, 64 died. The flood came out into the Santa Clara River Valley and turned west toward the ocean, moving around 18 miles an hour through Castaic Junction, Piru, Fillmore, Santa Paula, Satakoy, farm towns. 2 in the morning, asleep. The only warning most of them got came from 2 motorcycle patrolmen and a handful of telephone operators who stayed at their switchboards, calling houses 1 line at a time, ahead of water they could not see. Some of them did not leave. It reached the Pacific near Ventura at about 5:30 in the morning. 54 miles, 5.5 hours to cross a county. 1,200 homes gone. Bodies recovered from the coastline for weeks. And standing in the middle of the empty canyon, when the sun came up, was a piece of the dam still upright. The water was moving faster than the news of it. There was no siren system in the Santa Clara River Valley in 1928, and no way to reach a town except 1 line at a time. What the valley had instead was a night shift. At about 1:30 in the morning, the switchboard operator in Santa Paula, Louise Gipe, took a call from the long-distance operator up the line. The dam was gone. The water was coming. She stayed at the board. She called the highway patrol, and then she started calling houses in the low ground, one number after another, while the water came down the valley toward the building she was sitting in. The patrolman she reached was Thornton Edwards. He got on his motorcycle and rode into the streets of Santa Paula, and at some point in that ride, he did the arithmetic that decided how many people lived. He stopped going house to house. He went to every third house, told whoever answered to wake their neighbors, and moved on. He is remembered locally as the Paul Revere of the St. Francis Dam. Officer Stanley Baker rode with him. Up the valley, Deputy Sheriff Eddie Hearn drove toward the flood with his siren running. In Satakoy, another operator, Ricel Jones, did what Gipe was doing on her own board in her own town. The two of them were called the Hello Girls afterwards. None of them could see the water. They were working from a phone call and a name on a map, warning people about something none of them had witnessed in the dark, with no way to know how much time they had. The valley lost hundreds of people that night. It would have lost many more. The center section survived. A single monolith of concrete, roughly 100 feet tall, standing alone in a canyon that no longer had anything else in it. People called it the tombstone. Why it survived is the whole engineering lesson in one object. The center of the dam was founded on the most competent rock in the canyon, and, crucially, it was the part not anchored into either abutment. The failure did not begin in the concrete. It began at the two places where concrete met hillside, and the piece that touched neither hillside is the piece that stayed up. The concrete, in other words, was mostly fine. The dam did not fail as a dam. It failed as a connection between a dam and the ground. The tombstone became a tourist attraction almost immediately. Thousands drove out to see it. At least one person died climbing it. In 1929, the city dynamited it and broke up the rest of the ruins. And today, the site is largely unmarked, which is why most people in Los Angeles have never heard of the largest civil engineering failure of the 20th century in the United States, 40 miles from their houses. What did not disappear was the consequence for the profession. In 1929, California ended the exemption that had let municipalities approve their own dams. Independent state review became mandatory, and engineering geology, the discipline of establishing what is under a structure before designing it, became a required step in American dam design, largely because of this canyon. The inquest opened 9 days after the flood and ran for 2 weeks. It was led by the Los Angeles County District Attorney, Asa Keys, and it put the men who built the dam in a room and made them account for it. Some of what came out was technical. Workers testified that during construction, they had driven a tunnel into the mica schist of the western hillside, about 30 feet of it, big enough for a man to run a wheelbarrow through, to see what the rock was like. It was not filled with concrete until after construction had already begun. And some of it was not technical at all. Mulholland was 72. He took the stand and did something that engineers of his stature almost never do. He did not distribute the blame. "Don't blame anyone else," he said. "You just fasten it on me." At another point, asked how he was holding up, he said the only ones he envied about the whole thing were the ones who were dead. He was not consistent. Elsewhere in the same testimony, he suggested the site itself had been unlucky, that there was something wrong with the canyon, a hoodoo. A man taking full responsibility and looking for somewhere else to put it, in the same room on the same day. The jury did not recommend prosecution. It did something more lasting. It wrote in the verdict that the construction and operation of a great dam should never be left to the sole judgment of one man, no matter how eminent, without check by independent expert authority. That sentence is the reason the rules changed. Mulholland retired the same year and lived another 7, mostly out of public view. Now, I want to be straight with you about the version of this story I just told you, because I told it with more confidence than the evidence strictly allows. The two abutments have been arguing for a century. The original 1928 investigations concluded the failure started on the east side, the conglomerate dissolving under the reservoir. That was the official finding, and it is the version in most older accounts. The reconstruction I gave you, west side first, the ancient landslide reactivating, comes from much later work, most prominently forensic reanalysis from the 1990s onward that identified the paleo landslide the original investigators did not know was there. The modern reading is, in my judgment, better supported. It explains the eyewitness account of the western section going first. And it explains why the morning leak test came back clean when the dam was hours from failing. But it is a reconstruction of an event with no instrumentation and no survivors at the dam. And anyone who tells you the sequence is settled is overselling it. And the number, you will see 431, 450, and 500, all stated as fact. 431 is the figure from the most careful modern work, named victims, individually documented. The higher figures include the missing, and there is good reason to think even those are low. Many of the dead were migrant farm workers, a large share of them Mexican laborers whose families were in no position to file with a county coroner in 1928, and whose bodies went out to sea. The real number is probably higher than any of them, and it is unknowable. What makes this canyon worth 20 minutes is not that a dam broke. Dams break. It is that everything visible was fine. The concrete was adequate. The tombstone proved it by standing there alone. The design was conventional for its decade. The construction was competent. The inspection on the final morning was performed in person by the most qualified person available using the correct test. Everything that could be seen was checked, and everything that was checked passed. The thing that failed was the one part nobody had looked at, because in 1924, nobody had yet learned that you were supposed to look. The ground underneath, which had already broken on its own, long before anyone thought to build on it.